and all these things when they've never done anything themselves. Case in point, academics loved to criticize the Americans and say, oh, they didn't do enough. They said equality, but they didn't actually do enough. What they did is remarkable. Remarkable. They took this institution that's been around for 10,000 years and exists all over the globe, and here's what they did in very short order. First, they formed a constitution in which they did have to make several compromises. And here I follow the lead of Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass taught me, as I think he taught Abraham Lincoln. Frederick Douglass taught that it was a good thing that the Americans made these compromises, because what it allowed for the formation of a constitutional union that revolved around the idea of equality, which made abolitionism in some kind possible. As long as people were thinking and talking about equality, that meant slavery was in jeopardy. Slavery was on the ropes, and that's a good thing. If I had more time, I would go through these compromises, because it's quite striking when you look at it. I'll talk about just perhaps the most infamous, the 3/5 clause. You know why do you know why the men in the Constitutional Convention adopted the 3/5 clause? It's a beautiful story. The most adamant proponents of slave interests, so I'm talking about delegates from Georgia, South Carolina, they demanded that every slave be counted. Now, what does this matter? They were debating the House of Representatives. How is the House of Representatives structured? It's structured in a way where you take the population of a state, right? And then you assign a certain number of representatives to a state based on its population. So for any state, does a state want to have the biggest population or smallest population with regard to representation in Congress? You want it big. The bigger your number, the bigger your population, the more representatives you get. So Georgia and South Carolina, among others, say, we want to count each and every one of our slaves, because it would make their population bigger. That would mean they would get more representatives. You want to know their first justification? They said, we want to count all of our slaves as part of our population because they're people too. That was their argument. That's what they said. That they're people, they're going to be living under these, whatever laws this Congress make, these slaves got to live under them. So by golly, we're going to count each and every one of them. Hell, they would have been happy to count slaves as 2 or 3, because it would have made their population bigger. Now, a number of delegates who hated slavery, Hamilton included, he was there. And Hamilton's key on, Hamilton's beautiful in this situation. Their response at first was, you know, to hell with you. You don't get to count your slaves. Why should you get more representation in Congress just because you've bought a bunch of human beings from the Atlantic slave trade? What if you go back and count your slaves as 0? 0. You want to count your slaves? Let them vote. Make them citizens. Then you can count all of them. But if you're not going to let them vote, if you're not going to let them be citizens, you don't get to count them. So you see the two positions here at odds with each other. And this led to the first threat of secession in American history. It happens long before the Civil War. In 1787, in the Constitutional Convention, Southern states threatened to secede and leave the Union if they don't get to count their slaves, which means more power in Congress. And by the way, if a state has more representatives, that's not only more leverage in Congress. What does that mean for the selection of the president? How many electoral college votes does each state get? Number of representatives, right, +2, plus the number of senators. Why do you think the South... Now, have you ever noticed all the early presidents, with very few exceptions, from Washington up until Lincoln, they're all Southerners. Why are they all Southerners? Because the South got more representation for its slave population. That's why. So the South threatens and says, we want to, you're ripping us off if we don't get to count our slave, and we'll just leave. We'll go form our own confederacy. Georgia's the first one to say this. South Carolina says, we'll follow you, we're into. And they make a compromise. And why? Why did they make a compromise? Why not just say, go ahead and leave then? Go ahead. Well, a couple of interesting things. First of all, in 1787, does anybody know how many self-governing republics there are in the world? One. The United States. How do you think monarchists look at the United States and this experiment in self-government? You think they look kindly? Do they want those ideas to spread to their own nations and their own, not citizens, their own subjects? Do they want their subjects thinking about equality and government by consent? Hell no. So monarchies all over the world have an interest in crushing this American experiment in self-government, if at all possible. And the Americans, remember, had just fought. They had just fought a monarchical power, the British. And when all 13 colonies were united in the Revolutionary War, how did that go? Was that a slam dunk, easy victory? We barely squeaked out a victory. So what would happen if the United States breaks up into 2, 3, 4 bickering little republics? Well, someone like Hamilton and Madison agrees. European monarchical powers are going to come back and take out one at a time, and we will see monarchy replanted here in North America. So there's a powerful interest in keeping the Union together, the American Union. It's also the case, if you let Georgia leave, you let South Carolina leave, they go and form some slaveocracy. They say, to hell with you people in the North, we're going to go form a Southern Confederacy, and we're going to build in strong, strict, permanent protections of slavery forever. If that happens, have you done any good? Have you helped any slaves? Have you freed anybody? No, in fact, one could argue the future for slaves looks darker than ever before. So they decide to make some compromises. And what's interesting, I'm just going to say one more word about this. The 3/5 compromise, I think, actually demonstrates that the framers of the United States Constitution understood the humanity of the slaves, and here's why. Do you think did anybody stand up and demand their mules to be counted as part of their population? Did anybody demand that? Did anyone say, we want to count our pigs, our sheep, our oxen? Did anyone make those demands? No, nobody did. But they did demand to have their slaves counted. Now, why? Why would they demand to have their slaves counted, but not their horses or cows or sheep or goats? Because everyone in the room knew these are human beings. The rub, the difficulty, the challenges, what do you do with human beings when the laws have not yet acknowledged they're not being allowed to vote, they're not citizens? Do you give South Carolina more political leverage in the national government because they have slaves? Or do you try to lessen and lower the leverage that those slave states are going to have? We also passed the Northwest Ordinance, which stopped slavery from spreading to the whole Northwest Territory. This was the section of the country, remember, if this, let's see here. If this is the East Coast, right, and this is the West Coast of the United States, this is how we think of America, right? This is a great big thing that goes from ocean to ocean. But at the time of the founding, America was a few people smashed along the eastern seaboard. That's all America was. So from there, if you went north and west, you ended up in this block of land that later would become Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, that whole area. That was owned in common by the people of the United States, and they passed the Northwest Ordinance, which prohibited slavery from spreading to that territory. Add to this the fact that multiple states abolished slavery outright, like Massachusetts, or passed laws for the gradual elimination of slavery. Many laws, such as New York, many states such as New York said anyone born into slavery after they turn 21 or 25 would become a free man or a free woman. So the idea was within a generation there will be no more slavery. And so, Steve, can we do this one more time? So the Americans treat slavery almost like a cancer. They restrict it to where it already had existed in the original states. They stopped the supply coming in. They stopped the importation of slavery from Africa. They stopped the spread of it to new territories. And they work on where it is in those states to get rid of it. And from 1776, the Declaration of Independence, to 1800, it's only 24 years. In 24 years, half of the original states had either abolished slavery entirely, adopted measures for the gradual elimination of it, and even in the remaining states, there are very active anti-slavery societies popping up all over the place. It is, from my point of view, it is the greatest anti-slavery movement in human history. It is amazing how much they did and how much is happening in such a short period of time. Can we click again? I'm gonna summarize here. Things change. Things change, and a number of forces come to bear on this process of eliminating slavery. We were going in the right direction, and we were going in that direction pretty quickly, pretty swiftly. It was impressive. Some changes in technology made slavery much more profitable than it had ever been, ever. The invention of the steam engine, just to give an example, right? We Americans figured out how to put it on wheels and turn it into a train. The Europeans attached a steam engine to a loom, and they made the power loom. You know, a great big thing that goes back and forth. And in the old days, some schmuck had to stand there and pedal the thing to make the loom go back and forth. With a power loom, it could run 24 hours a day, but that also means you need lots of raw cotton to feed into it. Where are you going to get cotton? The American South. And all of a sudden, cotton becomes a massively profitable crop harvested on the backs of slaves. New theories coming from Europe. We hear some of this today. We're the most enlightened people in the world. Cutting-edge thinkers, really bright. They have to be in Europe, right? Europe is the land of really smart people. Well, the smartest, the cutting-edge theories of academicians and philosophers and scientists in the 19th century coming from Europe were all kinds of theories of evolution, historicism. And this fueled a kind of scientific racism. This became a part of academic science, that evolutionary forces had divided humanity into different races. This is some of the earliest formulations of the concept of race, a concept that was hitherto unknown. This comes about by evolutionary continental 19th century philosophy. We also see a kind of Christianity emerging in the American South, which placed a tremendous importance on strict literal interpretations of the Bible. And as the South was being bombarded by abolitionists saying slavery's wrong, get rid of slavery, you're evil, you're unchristian, the South turned back and said, damn right we're Christian. We believe in the Bible. And where in the Bible does God ever say that slavery's wrong? Where does he ever say that it should be abolished? Just the opposite. He regulates it. He tells slaves how they should behave to their masters. He offers regulations about how masters should treat slaves. And so slavery itself is a Christian biblical institution, and you abolitionists in the North, you're the atheists, you're the infidels, you're the radicals. I'm going to wrap up real quick here. All of this boils up into a massive fight, the American Civil War. And this idea of equality and the question of whether slavery is right or wrong, whether it can be compatible with equality, is at the heart of this fight. And what we Americans pay to get rid of an institution that no one had ever ended in 10,000 years. Included billions of dollars. It included a kind of destruction that is incomprehensible to us today. A kind of depression and melancholy settled over this country that lasted for more than a generation. And in the case of Abraham Lincoln, if you would click this one more time, his reward for leading that effort was a bullet blasted through his brain for helping Americans remember what equality means and why it is imperative to get rid of slavery. So, the next point. When we go around and we ask the question, why didn't Americans get rid of slavery sooner? Right? Why were they hypocritical? Why did they wait so long? I'm suggesting that's the wrong question. You're asking the wrong question. If you're going to ask that question, that top one, go ahead and ask it of every nation that's ever existed in the world. Why haven't Africans gotten rid of slavery? Why didn't people in Asia get rid of slavery? Why didn't the Greeks get rid of slavery? Why didn't the Romans? Why didn't Christians? Why didn't Jews? Why didn't Europeans? How come nobody ever got rid of slavery? The right question to ask about America is, why did these people in the United States form a new nation on the idea of human equality and take tremendous steps to get rid of slavery at great cost in blood and dollars within 2 generations? It is a beautiful and noble story of which we all should be very, very proud. Thank you all very much.